of the Legislative Assembly on Friday morning with the RCIPS's marching band and the inspection of the Guard of Honor by His Excellency. It was then time to move inside, where the throne speech, budget policy statement, and budget address were given.
Some of the highlights of the budget that I presented this morning included a lot of money being invested, continuing to be invested in education, to provide for the new school curriculum, for the redevelopment and enhancement of the new John Gray High School, and a number of other programs. So education gets a good chunk of money from us again in this budget cycle. Roads particularly get a good chunk of funding this year because of the continuing congestion. We are working, and we've put forward a number of the projects to deal with them in this next 2-year period rather than the next budget cycle. So, you know, those are two big areas that are going to receive a significant amount of funding in this time. We've also included a number of concessions now to the elderly people in our community, those over the age of 65. So they will see reduced fees for government services. In some cases, they're waived entirely. So, you know, a lot of good things. There's something in this budget, I think, for everybody. Everyone should be happy and be able to take away something from it. Enhancements as well in the terms of those who are most vulnerable in society. And so they're going to see that their monthly stipend will increase again this year, as well as in 2021. We're also happy to say too that the Premier announced this morning that civil servants are going to be getting a 5% increase in salary and compensation, and that will take effect from the 1st of January of 2020. So that follows through on our commitment that we made from earlier times that you know, we wanted to do our best to make sure that we rewarded civil servants as best we could during our time here, because of the sacrifices they made when times were much leaner and they actually had to take a pay cut about a decade ago. So, you know, just really happy to be able to do that and to see, you know, make that commitment to the civil service today. So I'm looking forward to the debate next week when we get back to the House, and looking forward to it being quite healthy and robust. And I'm looking forward to chairing Finance Committee in the coming days as well to try and get these appropriations approved and get the budget passed in short order.
During his throne speech, Governor Martin Roper talked about his time here in the Cayman Islands since becoming governor 1 year ago.
It has been little over a year since my wife, Lizzie, and I arrived in these beautiful islands. We have very much enjoyed getting to know you and are very grateful for the warm, Cayman-kind welcome we have received. It is
I call the meeting to order. Please be seated. Colleagues, when we took the lunch break, or during the time we were on the lunch break, I received a representation or request from two members who asked for some time to make a short statement, considered the matters that they wanted to raise, thought it important enough for them to do so. So I've accepted, and first one I'm going to allow is the member for Georgetown Central. He had a short statement, asked that he make it as quickly and as succinctly as he can.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a matter of clarity for, unfortunately, an article I see that it's in the paper today that reflects what I see as not the truth as to the standing of this House, of this committee on Friday. In the paper, it has an article that heads up or titled Same-Sex Marriage or Independence. And in that article, unfortunately, the narrators of the article has drawn or pushed readers to conclude that I suggested that this committee, by way of Parliament, should consider independence or cutting ties with the United Kingdom if in fact the UK was to impose same-sex marriages. I think it's important that I clarify that I did not say that, but was simply outlining the seriousness of the situations that we face in the Cayman Islands, and that it's important for us to consider what the Premier has said, that there will be legislation brought to this Honourable House for us to consider that will meet the requirements of the declaration of the Appeals Court. So again, I just want to clarify for the listening audience, I have not suggested that this House should cut the ties with the United Kingdom on the basis of same-sex marriages. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, member. I also would like to recognize the Speaker of the House.
West Bay West.
West Bay West. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, as a matter of public interest and in deference to the position of Speaker of the House, there was a malicious hack of my personal social media page. As we know, this is not only illegal under ICTA law, but it is a personal attack to impugn my character. This matter is under active investigation by the police department. To get to the source of this maliciousness in this climate of referendum mudslinging, all should be reminded that even the act of sharing, the sharing of such illegal, immoral, and vindictive posts carries significant consequences under the law. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome, sir. Okay, colleagues. Colleagues, we continue on with examining the appropriations to the Premier by opening up now with CBO 21, Broadcasting of Public Information and On-Air Programs, $1,489,239 in 2020 and $1,489,238 in 2021. Are there any questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Member from Savannah.
Semi-comment and question. As I daily listen to the news on Radio Cayman, especially I notice in the mornings you get about a minute or two of news, then they fades off, that we'll turn to regional news and then the BBC News. If I want to hear BBC News, I go listen to BBC News. And then during the day you may get 19 seconds of the activities going on in the island. I just wonder who chooses or or how do they prepare for passing out the news? I just would like to see that as we go forward, that it could be a little bit more detailed. There's so many things, especially this time here, going on in Cayman, if they could just share a lot more of this with us.
I take it that was just a suggestion, sir, rather than a question. Were you seeking to find out how it's determined?
I would like to know how they choose the news. If anybody goes out, looks around, read the paper, because a lot of times I see the news that they have on the radio is stuff that I read in the paper a couple of days ago.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with the honourable member. We don't have, as elected government, any say at all, any involvement. The only thing we do is issue press releases, and maybe someone will call you back and say, from the radio station, say, would you give us a soundbite from your press release? But that's the extent to which I or any elected members have anything to do with that. So I can't really respond to the question except to agree with it.
Cabinet Secretary, you responding?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may add just a bit of further information on the newscasts themselves, I must first offer apologies for the Director of Broadcasting, who is off island on pre-planned personal leave, and the Deputy is unable to be here today due to circumstances beyond her control. But I do have some background information on the newscasts. So their major newscast, as we all know, is at 6 p.m. And that runs from about 8 to 10 minutes, and that's of local news on a daily basis. That's followed by the Caribbean News Update Service, which we run for about 5 to 7 minutes. And then, as the member noted, we usually get about 5 minutes of BBC News, but between that there are also the public service announcements or the regular announcements and weather. And at 4:30, the other newscasts for the day, I believe the AM and the midday newscasts run around 4 minutes and 30 seconds long. They attempt to contain 2 local stories, no less than 2 local stories, and then supplemented by 1 or 2 regional stories. But we have a news director, and the team of reporters are throughout the day collating and collecting their stories to get ready for the 6 p.m. major broadcast. They have the ability to break in with any major news, a police event or what have you, a road closure, an accident has happened, XYZ. So they try to put together a quick package. And I think at the top of the hours, there are some 30 seconds of local news at the top of the hour, in addition to the 7, 8, and midday broader newscasts. So just providing that background information.
I think most of that, Mr. Chairman, is about 19 seconds. I could sometimes almost feel like timing it.
Member from East End.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we went to considerable expense in somewhere between 2006 and 2007 to purchase a mobile broadcasting unit, the van. And the intent of that then was to also do live broadcasts, that is news and the likes. But I haven't heard it for a while, and when it is, it's some advert or something, some business they're promoting. Is there an intention to use that for live broadcasts other than specific events?
Again, Mr. Chair, through you, you'll forgive me. I am doing my best to cover for Radio Cayman, but I am aware that from time to time they will have remote broadcasts of some of the talk shows. As you pointed out, it's a promotional it is strongly used for promotional events, especially on weekends. They have remote broadcasts where they will go to a location where there is a charities event, or sometimes the local business event as well, and they will have broadcasts. I think the Youth Flex show has done a remote broadcast. I think they still do sports shows sometimes, sports matches from time to time are remotely broadcasted, and they do church services in Cayman Brac, around the island as well. They still cover church services live on a Sunday or Saturday, conventions, those types of things. So we are using it. I'm not sure about a live news broadcast, because what's required, the reporters have to put together a package and get the stories put together. So I'm not sure how feasible. I've never asked. I could talk to them about doing a news broadcast live, but they tend to, they're using the van. It's in use. And that's an excellent asset, I might say.
I know, that's why I sort of separated those events, like football and the likes. You'll hear them broadcasting it, and church services. Those are events that but I'm talking about news stories. So if, I don't know, an example, there could be, on the news item today, could be about canvassing people about the dock or something, and they're live on there with one or two questions or something. That kind of stuff. That I know they do it for Pirates Week, but and the landing and like those kind of things. But that's what I'm talking about. News that is current and now, and 6 o'clock this evening. Migrated as part of that news item.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm 100% certain, as we know that this is being broadcast live on Radio Cayman. I'm certain that the team is listening to that suggestion. As you know, quite often they do canvassing of the public, and it's part of a recorded package. So there is a possibility. I'm sure they would be willing to explore it, finding a location and being there and doing some parts of a news broadcast live. I think that's obviously, if we have a car accident or something like that, it's we to get the van there to set up to broadcast the news is a little more difficult, but we can explore it, sir, by all means.
Yeah. I know you don't have the intricate details on these things, but do the reporters go out and look news, or they wait for it to break elsewhere and then they start looking for it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm very proud to say that Radio Cayman is we believe is the leading news organization on island, and as the Premier noted, while we don't, myself as chief officer or the elected government don't tell them what news to report on, they have an excellent Caymanian as the news director, and the director of broadcasting, Ms. Norman. They push the team to go out there and find stories. There might be stories that they're working on from time to time. They'll call civil servants and put together something and ask questions. Sometimes they're very, very tough questions. And I think they do a good job of striking a balance. So they don't wait to read the news in another source to run a story on it. There's been times where the Radio Cayman story has been the first story on a particular matter of national importance.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's when we don't want to go to no one else. And I know, like, if we send out a press release, that's the opposition now. They'll call and say if you want to do a sound bite. But the news has already come out. It's already broke. It's everybody got it. I'm talking about things like initiating stuff. I've never heard anybody from Radio Cayman call any of us, at least not me, to say we understand so and so is happening. Do you have something? We expect so and so to happen. Like the most recent thing with the premier, and I never heard anybody. Not a soul came to me. Did anybody reach out to you all with this thing? Mr. Miller said no. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, you know. They may have reached out to the premier, I don't know.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, can the Cabinet Secretary say how many members of staff for the news department they have at Radio Cayman? Mr. Chair, if I can assist the Cabinet Secretary, I kind of knew the answer, I just wanted him to say it, but the answer is 5. And one of those are dedicated to sports. My question to the Cabinet Secretary, do you think that's enough employees to cover the news as news is supposed to be? Because I, as you know, a former journalist myself, not a lot of people to cover proper newscasts like what the leader of opposition has said in order to get to the hard-hitting news and getting to the scenes and the like. And is there a policy or a directive that suggests that there should be both sides, the opposition side as well, in respect to political or governmental matters?
Mr. Chair, through you, to answer the first question in terms of the numbers of staff, as you will see, Radio Cayman has not, there's not been much growth in their budget. They have kept over many years the same, more or less the same staff levels. And we're seeing where that it is a challenge right now to keep up, because we live in a 24-hour news cycle. When you add in, as the member who worked in news organizations would know, when one person is off on vacation, the strain, we come back to the earlier point of on leave that is unused, because these individuals are covering the bases, and I can't speak enough to their dedication. People go into broadcasting and journalism not for money, they do it for passion. And if I can again pay a tribute briefly here for these individuals, for their integrity, for their passion and commitment to Radio Cayman, the radio station, I can't say enough about them. And so, perhaps it is time, to consider, given the news demands, and I think they're doing a pretty good job of trying to use social media as well, Facebook, to also as an avenue and channel to push out the news. But we from time to time have vacancies. People will move on. And to fill that again, that creates a void. So I think we're possibly having to look at additional numbers. But if anything, why we have not made that request is because we're trying to work with our allocation and not trying to overspend. I don't think Radio Cayman can ever be accused of that. So I think it is time for us to perhaps in the near future start to look at some additional staff in the newsroom, but also in other key areas at Radio Cayman. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the good thing about the near future is it's right here and right now. Can the Cabinet Secretary say what the salaries are for reporters at Radio Cayman?
Mr. Chair, through you, at the peril of getting it wrong, without identifying anybody, I believe they are either on the M scale or the L scale. I believe M or L scale. I think that's where, yeah.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, this is a matter of preamble, considering the fact that we've lost Cayman 27, and in the interest of news and information for the public, can I make a suggestion that we add another 2 salaries to this budget today to allow Cayman, Radio Cayman, which is the #1 news network relied on by the Caymanian people in respect to information via radio, whether it would be considerable to allow 2 more salaries to be added so they can help fill that void that we keep on talking about, because it is a hard job to go out and get all that information, particularly when you have to deal with days off and vacations and all the like. Would this honorable committee be willing to consider that?
Member, opposition cannot propose increases in the budget, is my understanding, or may to be corrected, but that's the advice that I'm given.
Well, Mr. Chair, if I recall my wording, I was asking if the government would support it, not me suggesting it. So I'm just suggesting that they support it by bringing it themselves.
Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Chairman.
Member for Savannah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to say that a couple of things I was critical on, but I must take my hat off to Radio Cayman. As we all remember, in the hurricane season, they're absolutely #1 for the coverage of that. They're 6 o'clock in the morning, their religious hymns that they play there, and for an hour and a half in the nights from 10:30 till midnight, they have some wonderful music on there, also on Saturday evenings, and they really play some good music, and I must take my hat off and say how much I enjoy listening to that. Also, I know the talk show in the afternoons from about 12:30 till 2:30, it gets stimulating sometimes. So I must give credit to them for that. It's just a little bit of news. I personally feel that in Cayman, the size we are, that we need to know more what's going on.
Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify that there was a response of no to suggestion that the government should propose another 2 salaries to Cayman, Radio Cayman. Am I correct? Because all I heard was a no. I wasn't sure if he was a. The question is, can the government suggest or propose adding more so that we can meet that demand of that void that is missing from Radio Cayman?
I think the Premier answered that question earlier, sir.
What was the answer? Because I didn't get it. I think there was a number of people speaking.
Mr. Chairman, we don't go about increasing staff levels in government departments on a whim because somebody thinks it's a great idea. There has to be a proper study carried out to determine whether or not that is called for. I have seen no such study. I've seen no evidence, and there has been no request for an increase in staffing by the department itself.
Mr. Chair, just a totally different question. Can the Cabinet Secretary or the Premier indicate whether or not the Radio Cayman is considering going to Facebook Live or Facebook Live options for the radio show outside of YouTube, as well as actually the Legislative Assembly?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, maybe it's something we should consider.
All in favor of?
No.
You have questions? Needed an indication.
Yeah, but he did before, but you said he was in front of me. You're not that lucky. No.
Okay.
No,
Bordentown, go ahead, sir.
That's all right. First of all, Mr. Chairman, through you, I think we just need to be careful in terms of how we engage with Radio Cayman, because at the end of the day, they still have certain journalistic standards that they need to maintain. And I think ultimately we in this honorable house need to make sure we maintain as hands-off an approach, especially when it comes on to the news and the journalists. Part of it not to directly see that we are interfering in that regard. And like my colleague from Savannah, I too hold Radio Cayman in a very high regard. Many members in this house are old enough to remember that they were the only radio station that was up after Hurricane Ivan and the only source for us for news. And I just also want, just before I get into my question, I know there's always been a lot of criticism on my friend OC. And I just want the record to set that since For the Record has started, it has only had one host. And while many different radio stations have changed hosts, For the Record has maintained one host unless he's on vacation. And I can tell anybody, as a person who started out spending Friday mornings on that show with him and beating the government to death, no one has ever yet said to me that don't let Chris go on the show. So I don't want anyone out there to believe that there was some sinister plan or something when it comes on to For the Record, they guess, or what it is that we say. Anyway, I just had to clear that up. Just going into my question through you, Mr. Chairman, just looking at the budget documents or the output groups that go with CBO 21, which is RCI 1, RCY 2, and RCY 3. Just looking at RCY 3 on page 47 of the budget and statements, I couldn't help but notice that the total costs across this vote is going up by 201,000 or 16%. And I know this in terms of the number of commercials sold, which is listed on page 47. It is actually increased by 50%, but yet the forecasted revenues over the next 2 years is pretty much the same. So I'm trying to figure out how is it that per the quantity we're looking to increase the number of commercials sold by 50%, but the revenues has remained flat. And as you know, what we vote on in this house is net off what it is that they won't earn for themselves, and pretty much what it is that we subsidize. So I'm just trying to understand the thought process behind that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we want to make sure we answer the question correctly. And again, I'm asking for a little bit of understanding because the Radio Cayman team is not able to be here, but we will provide an answer. Could the member kindly repeat the question one more time?
Sure. On page 47 of the budget statements, on the very first line on the quantity, number of commercials sold, as you can see for 2020 and 2021, it's between 36 to 37,000 in both years, but in 2019 it is 24 to 25,000. So there's basically a 50% increase in commercials sold. But the revenues of 854,000, which is noted at the bottom, is the same as the revenues over the last 2 years. So with the quantity of commercials sold increasing by 50%, I was wondering why the revenues remain flat, unless you're going to reduce the price of the commercials.
Mr. Chair, I do see the member's point. I can say that the revenue performance has been better in the last couple of years. I know in the past that they had more, the revenue didn't perform as well in years gone by. In the recent years, they have met their revenue numbers. Perhaps I will need to provide this response in writing just to understand what the thinking was for not having, for not increasing the revenue number, because clearly, as you have pointed out, the number of commercials sold are going up, and I'm not aware of any policy. I can clearly say I'm not aware of any policy of discounting the sales or the prices for advertising, for paid advertising on the radio station. So we will commit to providing that response in writing.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. That is sufficient. The one thing I would also add, just as a matter of for the record, is that usually in most media circles, whenever there's an election year, the spend normally goes up. So you'd expect at the minimum in 2021, just like in the US next year, the advertisement rates would go up because of an election year. So just bear that in mind with the assumptions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All those in favor of CBO 21, broadcasting of public information on air programs, $1,489,239 in 2020 and $1,489,238 in 2021. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. URC 1. Drafting legislation and policy advice, $74,289 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Northside.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, this vote is increased by 140%, yet the quantity of outputs is exactly the same. And of course, they're all 100% implemented. We could have some justification for the increase.
Mr. Chairman, just so because I was engaged in a side conversation, the question is why has the quantity of items remain the same, but the cost increased?
Yes, basically.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to request that the CEO of OFREG
Fine, Premier.
be able to answer these the questions I expect. Mr. Chairman, the new CEO is Mr. Maliki Cummings. He has been in office for some 2 months now, and so I'd like to introduce him to the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Maliki. For purposes and just for completeness, will you please state your name and your permission and your position before you respond to the question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon. My name is Maliki Cummings, CEO of OFREG. In response to the member's question, URC1 has now been combined with URC4. Previously, it would have been applicable just to policy advice. But as of now, for 2021 and 2022, it is combined with URC4, which entails drafting instructions for development of legislation.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the quantity for 2019 is the same as the quantity for 2021 and 2020. So if there's a combination of stuff since 2019, there should be an increase in the quantity.
Mr. Chair, there is a slight error in the quantity. It should have been less.
How much should it be?
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I would prefer to provide this information in writing later on.
To you, Mr. Chairman, the descriptive talks about drafting additional regulations, amending existing regulations. And we have quite substantive law existing now. It's 75 pages and 113 clauses. Clause 93 to 103 deal with offenses under the legislation. How many prosecutions have we had under this legislation since it was brought into force in 21st of February 2019? This is the revised law. The law was here before that, but it's first done in 2016.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware that there's been any.
Second question is clause 91 in the law authorizes the authority for administrative fines. Have there been any administrative fines with any of the units licensed under this law?
Mr. Chair, there has been at least one I'm aware of, but we can't commit to providing the total numbers in writing.
Mr. Chairman, I don't like this idea of simply answering questions by committing to provide it sometime in the future in writing. If the CEO doesn't have the answer, does he have anybody else who might have the answer since he's new to the job?
Mr. Chair, there is no one in the room at the moment who will be able to provide that information.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, one of the things that has been identified in the past in terms of the effectiveness of this legislation was that it didn't have sufficient individual teeth. In other words, offenses to deal with, whether it was a telephone or TV. And we went through some amendments to the legislation in 2016 and 2017. Can the CEO say whether those changes in the legislations have had any effect, and whether the legislation now has sufficient specific offenses, i.e., when I'm paying for 10 megabytes and I'm only getting 6?
Mr. Chair, I'll like to invite the Executive Director of ICT to address that question.
Mr. Chairman, Ali Faamoy, Deputy CEO and Executive Director, ICT. I thank the member for the question. Yes, we did go through a number of changes to the laws that would give us more teeth. I think all members would appreciate that you don't necessarily need to exercise the powers that you have. As long as folks know that you do have those powers, things can change, and things have changed. We've seen a greater degree of compliance on the ICT side, and I'm sure the other sectors have seen something similar, but in respect to application of the administrative fines, just having that power has been able to grant the office the ability to move things forward in a more expeditious manner. And the other part of the question around how we would go about implementing some of those changes to the law and how that can help us. Being able to take enforcement action as we have with delinquent licensees earlier this year, the powers that were vested in the law enabled us to move those enforcement actions to a rapid conclusion earlier this year.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, would you consider delinquency of a licensee if I am paying for 10 megabytes and only getting 6?
Right now, no. Unfortunately, the way the licenses are drafted, the plan is to change the licensing framework, which has been in place for the last 15 years, to a new licensing framework that is more modern, more comprehensive, and enables the customer to get what they pay for. So there are two things that are happening. The licensing framework is changing to hold service providers more accountable for the services that they deliver. So instead of saying up to 10 meg for your account, Mr. Miller, it will be 10 meg. If you contract for 10 meg, you will have to get 10 meg or a very close approximation to 10 meg. The second thing that is happening is we plan to provide the consumer with the ability to independently verify his speed through an independent platform, and the results of that would be fed to the regulator so that when a complaint arises, we have an independent source of truth upon which we can investigate and make a determination.
But with the greatest of respect, sir, this was the same thing you told us in the last budget session, that you were in the process of getting this stuff. When do we expect to have this new framework? And why wasn't that new framework put in the license that we were understood were committed? Although they were up in 2018, the government was giving them 1 year and going to renew them in July 2019 in order to put in place these kinds of framework. Have those licenses been renewed? Is that framework in the license?
Mr. Chairman, through you, the licenses were renewed under the same terms and conditions because the framework needed to be redone entirely. The framework is old. It's 15 years old. The world of technology has dramatically changed in that time. So the framework couldn't be piecemeal adjusted. It needed to be redone in its entirety. That consultation has been done. The comments have been received from the general public and the licensees, and we're about ready to publish the determination this week or next week.
And the license that were renewed in 2019 give the authority that flexibility?
Yes, sir.
But how then can the solution to my dilemma of paying for 10 and getting 6 by the provider is that I should pay for 25?
There's a third thing that we're doing very shortly, and that's consumer protection regulations, which will help the consumer and the office to make sure that you get what you pay for.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'm concerned that this thing is taking so long. And while I will try to appreciate that it might be complicated, 3-4 years is a long time to get this kind of thing accomplished. I mean, what is the government doing? What is OFREG doing? I mean, either we have a regulatory authority, and why is it that all of the regulatory authorities in government seem to be looking only for negotiated solutions instead of putting in place a solution that is best for the consumer?
I would agree with the member, Mr. Chairman, that this is taking longer than any of us would like it to take. We just don't have unlimited resources to do everything, and this isn't the only thing we're trying to do. However, on the ICT side, and I can only speak for the ICT side of OFREG, we do not negotiate licenses.
But the mere fact that you're consulting with them before you put something in place, isn't that a process of negotiation?
No, sir.
Sorry.
Sorry.
And the reason for the consultation was for them to have input into the final decision.
The way the law is structured and regulators are set up like this around the world, you have a process of consultation so that parties who are affected by the ruling that you're going to make, whether it's licensees or the general public, have the opportunity for input. It's considered part of the democratic process when it comes to what is effectively a quasi-judicial part of government. The same as this Honorable House serves as a forum for debate and discussion. The quasi-judicial regulator needs to have a forum for debate and discussion before it makes rulings. And the consultation process provides for that input from as wide a body as possible.
So the creation of utility, regulatory, and competition law, which swallowed up what you were running before, has made your job more bureaucratic and more onerous and more difficult to help the consumer, is what you're saying, in a roundabout way.
Is that a question?
To be able to answer it sitting here in front of these people, and I wouldn't put you on that spot, but that's the feedback that the public is getting, that we were all promised in the introduction of this legislation in 2016 that we were going to get price control on fuel, we were going to get quality assurance, we were going to get consumer protection. Here we are 5 years later, and we don't have neither. And ICTA, in fairness to them, was well on its way to achieving many of the things that you're still trying to do now when you were separate and apart.
Mr. Chair, through you, in response to the members' comments, OFREG was established with the best of intentions to take advantage of the synergies and complementarities of the individual regulatory agencies. We are all aware of the significant challenges over the years. Since taking office, we have reviewed our business processes. We are making significant operational and structural changes so that OFREG could actually deliver what it was set up to do.
So you're admitting that the way OFREG was set up, it didn't deliver what it was intended to do?
Mr. Chair, OFREG has made a lot of progress, but there were significant challenges that more or less dwarfed some of the progress that was made.
The former CEO said that the philosophy, the objective of OFREG under his guidance was not to regulate and not to ensure quality of prices, was simply to find ways to introduce competition which would achieve those two things. Do you support that philosophy?
Mr. Chair, there are some sectors that will require regulation, and there are some sectors where OFREG promotes competition where it's necessary. The objective, competition is not an objective in itself. The objective has to be what market mechanism could we have to minimize costs and prices. So competition itself in itself is not an objective. As it relates to the electricity sector, we have a natural monopoly. So under that regime, you will have the regulation is such that the utility is regulated. But when it comes to like the ICT sector, it is more competition.
Can you explain then why increased competition hasn't led to any reduction in prices in ICT sector or any improvement in quality. We started off with 1, we got 2, there was some reduction in price until they came to a position where both were making sufficient money, and then we have court injunctions taken out by one part against the other not to lower any more prices. How do you plan to overcome things like that injunction through
Mr. Chair, as it relates to the competitive market, I am advised that OFREG is taking the necessary steps, one of it being the establishment or determination of significant market power. So this assessment is currently being done for the ICT sector. With such an assessment, we will be able to establish the necessary rules and improve the regime so that we could ensure that competition is not thwarted, so to speak.
so that you can ensure competition is not thwarted by the companies themselves?
Mr. Chair, please repeat, sir.
I gave the scenario where the 2 main players in the telephone and market, with the introduction of Digicel, prices went down rapidly until they got sufficient market share to where they were getting what they considered, I guess, sufficient return on their investment. And there's been no reduction in prices since, even though other players have come onto the market. How does your organization, OFREG, intend to deal with that lack of competitiveness? Because you can't convince me that they're competing when they're selling the same phone for the same price on the same day.
Mr. Chair, OFREG is undertaking the necessary assessment, and until that is complete, we will be in a better position to make a determination.
Mr. Chairman, I'm really getting kind of full of these assessments that are being done by these regulatory authorities, because every time you question them, there's some assessment being done, which leads me to this fact. 2 years ago, I think we were told that you were doing a big study on the color of the handles for the fuel. Has that study been completed?
Mr. Chair, to the best of my knowledge, yes.
How much did it cost?
Mr. Chair, to the best of my knowledge, it did not cost OFREG, except, of course, the man hours that the office would have used to get the determination done.
In the last budget session, Mr. Chairman, we were told specifically they were hiring a consultant to do it. So you're saying you didn't hire a consultant? Okay. It is finished. How come, when is it going to be implemented?
Mr. Chair, to the best of my knowledge, I believe it has been implemented, but I will seek to provide that information.
Sure. If you think it has been implemented, I invite you to go to the gas stations when you leave here, because I can assure you that they're not all the same color, and they don't all represent the same thing. So, or was the result of the study that we didn't need to standardize the colors of the handles?
Mr. Chair, I do not have the information at my disposal at this moment. The Chief Fuel Officer could not have made it to this meeting, sir.
And you have a Chief Fuel Officer who does a consultation, completes an exercise, but do you know what colors are recommended for which handle?
Mr. Chair, I've only been in this post 2 months, so I'm still learning about the procedures and processes. and our business operations of OFREG. We have gone to a lot of extent to put in place internal control measures, and we have prioritized our work to deal with those, what I will call, burning imperatives. So I've not had that discussion, sir.
In this increase in budget for new regulations, is there any plans for some kind of formula for fuel to regulate the price of fuel?
Mr. Chair, the fuel market assessment commenced in October, and it is expected to be completed in 6 months, so by April. To the best of my knowledge, it does not require or entail any other additional costs.
So in 6 months, you will be in a position to recommend the government a formula by which fuel prices will be regulated.
Mr. Chair, the objective of the study is to ensure we could establish appropriate regulatory rules and set up a regime that ensures good economic regulatory initiatives are in place for fuel prices.
Mr. Chairman, through you, question is, you're doing a study. Is the purpose of the study to determine what are the economic forces that should drive fuel prices in the Cayman Islands, or is the intent of the study to determine whether prices need to be controlled and therefore recommend a formula by which those prices can be regulated?
Mr. Chair, the results of the study will give us indication as to what intervention measures will need to be taken for the regulation of the fuels market. The fuels market in the Cayman Islands, the regulatory regime is quite unique, and I've taken that into account. But I also want to respect the process and the legislation, and it is advisable that we allow that process to unfold before we implement.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to my recollection, we've done at least one, if not two, of those studies before, and the last one resulted in the gas station having to publish the prices at which the fuel was sold. And you're saying we're doing another study now to determine how we're going to approach it?
Member for Northside, can I ask you to give to members on this side here? We've got a number that are looking to ask some questions. Member for Bordentown West, you indicated to me earlier of your interest.
Thank you, Mr.
Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, through you. And I want to just put my question in context. If you look on page 605 of the ownership agreement, you will see that remuneration payments made to senior management or budgeted for 2020 is just under 1.1 million. And it also says that there are 7 senior managers, which puts the average cost for senior managers at OFREG at $157,000 per year. If you look at page 625 of the same ownership agreement, you will see that the total personnel cost for OFREG is just over 3.5 million, and with an average, and they're expecting to have 28 staff for the year. That's 126,550 in costs per employee. If you were to also look, Mr. Chairman, at the HR report that was provided by the portfolio of the Civil Service for 2018, plus the personnel costs across the entire government for 2018, you will see that the average cost per civil servant is actually 50% less than what we're spending over at OFREG. So I want to preamble in terms of industry standards across that we are paying a premium for this service compared to everyone else. And after saying all of that, Mr. Chairman, my question really and truly is this. With the Cayman Islands paying a premium for this service compared to our competitors elsewhere, when can we realistically expect to start getting value for money from this entity? Now, I am looking at the 320 hours that was forecasted on page 50 in terms of all of this stuff that they were supposed to do, that they did in 2019 and also in 2020. And it appears as if it is a case where the hours are going in, but nothing is coming out of those hours. So the question is simply, when can we expect to start getting something, some output, some outcome from what it is that we're basically subsidizing and paying into this entity?
Mr. Chair, the regulator has been set up to regulate economic infrastructure, utility infrastructure. One of the roles of the regulator is to collect information from the industry, conduct the necessary engineering, economic, financial assessment. The information, the utilities will always have that information asymmetry over the regulator. The utility will also, to a large extent, have the asymmetry in terms of human resource. So in terms of the costing of personnel, it may not be a very good benchmark to use the public service pay scale and compare that to that of a regulator. In other jurisdictions, it is a similar case where the regulator tries to attain the best skill set. The skill set required in the industry is quite unique, especially when you look at your need and understanding of regulatory economics and so forth. Since coming into office, we have been looking at understanding, improving, revising our business processes with the sense of ensuring that whatever we are doing is in keeping with our remit. We are actually going back to basics to ensure that our fundamentals are right. Except that if you do not have your fundamentals right, then it will have a negative impact, more or less, on the sustainability of your regulatory outcomes. So we are making changes so that we could improve what we are set up to do, but also to provide the necessary change that the Cayman Islands expects of us.
Mr. Chairman, through you to the witness, I'm looking at page 599, strategic goals and objectives, again, of the ownership agreement. And the very first one says, ensure that service providers operate in an environment which is fair and provides an opportunity to realize reasonable returns on investments. That is the first listed mission that is here. We didn't put this is what was submitted on their behalf. And the part that we have, well, first of all, as you can see, the very first one listed isn't consumer-centric. It is about businesses and their return on the investments. And what I have a problem reconciling, Mr. Chairman, is that we cannot be ranked 190 out of 196 in broadband costs we can't be ranked very high in terms of what we're paying for fuel, but yet the costs that we're basically having for our regulators put us at also almost close to number one globally. I will challenge anyone to go around, any regulator around this globe, and see if their costs that they're spending on their regulatory body is as high as ours, but yet we're not seeing the same thing in terms of what it is we're supposed to be getting. And they must recognize at some point the public must be wearing thin with regards to the output that's coming out. And I really feel bad for the cabinet and everyone else who's relying on this information, because as you can see, they're the one who's purchasing the service. And the question is exactly what is the cabinet purchasing, or what is it that they're getting now? Because I think even the cabinet themselves would admit they're not getting value for money either.
Mr. Chairman, I think we all acknowledge that OFREG has not thus far performed the way that we expected, that it was designed to, and has not been delivering the kind of results that we need. The whole idea of merging these various entities into one was to create one entity that had the wherewithal to effectively regulate this the utility sector. I think we're at a point now where we have a new CEO in post. It's going to take him a while to get his head around the various issues, but I am certain he understands the great weight that he has on his shoulder and the level of expectations they are. So I would urge us not to lose hope and faith. I certainly haven't in the entity. We may need to make some adjustments to the legislation. I myself have some real reservations about some parts of the legislation. I had them when it was being drafted, but I was overruled more than once by the circumstances. But I do believe that we have to look at some of those structural issues. But I would just invite us to give Mr. Cummings an opportunity to get his feet onto the desk properly and to get his head around these. There are high expectation levels for him, and I know he takes all of that very seriously.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say to the Premier, I appreciate him appealing to the members on this side, and I too would somewhat endorse what he says. We have a new gentleman there. We have to give him a chance, but certainly the Premier should at the very least commit to us for this gentleman not to come back in 2 years' time, but in short order to at least update us on the successes and what is happening within the next 2 or 3 months or something like that.
Mr. Chairman, I am prepared to undertake to make a statement to this Honourable House at a juncture forward. I don't know whether it's 2 months or 3 months. I don't want to make this undertaking without discussion with Mr. Cummings, but to update you on where he is and where we think we are with respect to the structural changes and hopefully some successes as well.
Through you, thanks very much for that, Mr. Premier. Through you, Mr. Chairman, in terms of the regulation, is the OFREG consider looking at contention ratio in terms of internet providers or anything like that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was distracted too. I didn't get the question.
No, I was saying in terms of regulations, if OFREG is looking at regulating contention ratio within the broadband or the internet space.
Mr. Chairman,
Can I just ask you again to restate your name and your position? every time we switch, we needed to do it in order that the handsets can be correct.
Yes, sir. Ali Fa'amoy, Deputy CEO and Executive Director, ICT at Offreg. Contention ratios aren't as large an issue anymore with the architecture that's currently being deployed by internet service providers. It used to be a major part of the ADSL kind of environment. It's less of an issue these days. What we're concerned about, to the member's point, is whether the customer is actually getting what they pay for in terms of broadband access. And broadband access is not measured by the speed that they're getting to their roadside cabinet or the speed that they're getting from their house to Georgetown, but the speed they're getting to the nearest tier 1 access point, which is where the real internet begins. And for the Cayman Islands and 90% of the Caribbean and Latin America, that is in Florida. That is where we will be setting up our measurement tool.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And then, which then begs the next question, which is the issue that the member for Northside raises. I mean, I have the same issue too. You pay for 15, 20 megabytes, and sometimes you're running to getting 4 or 5 megabytes. So what really then is the cost for that in terms of why we can't get what it is that we're paying for? I mean, if the architecture is designed the way it's designed, we should definitely be getting better speeds than what we're getting now then.
We agree.
So the next step is then what is going to be done to make sure that we act. Let me explain to you why we're going along this line of questioning, because the minute we get onto the TV issue and access and everything to the free service we're supposed to be getting, a lot of that is dependent on us actually getting internet speeds and everything else to the home, since that is the direction where most providers are going now. So even if they want to provide the free service, if the infrastructure, the architecture isn't there for them to provide the service, then it basically becomes useless. So step one is actually getting this access or the broadband correct. And that is one of the things now where it seems that everybody has been dropping on. And we believe that we need to make sure we get that right now. At one point, I know the government was exploring even putting fiber themselves. I don't know what's the latest update on that one to try to fix that issue. But at the end of the day, you have 3-4 providers here with a population of 46,000 working people. At some point, someone must realize that having 4 providers catering to 46,000 working people and a couple 100,000 visitors is a little bit too much. And the only way that they can stay in business is to basically charge above market. Thus the reason why we are where we are. So the question is, at some point, do we allow the market forces to either A, drive them out, B, left with 2 players, and then we regulate the hell out of those 2 players to make sure they don't rip us off. But it can't be a situation right now where technology, where we're living in this day and age now, where we should be having high-speed internet for the country that we're trying to build. And out in East End and North Side and parts of Bordentown, we're still having the same struggles in terms of getting where we should get compared to where our competitors are. So this is why it is important for us to get this infrastructure. So if the government at one point I know was looking at taking a lead on it and having those guys to pay for it, then so be it. But the bottom line is we need infrastructure in place. And if they can't step up to the plate, then someone needs to. But the question is, how do we get it inside here where people have access to high-speed internet? Because just about every TV you look at now is everything over the internet and everything else. So how do we get that infrastructure here and not 3, 4, 5 years down the line, but our kids and everybody else need it in this day and age? So that is really the question in all of that. The long go-around way is, how do we ensure that we have the infrastructure to ensure that the Cayman Islands are a world-class destination, not just in parts of Georgetown, not parts in 7 Mile Beach, but Cayman, Brac, Little Cayman, and the rest of the Cayman Islands?
Mr. Chairman, just because you don't get the service that you would like doesn't mean the infrastructure isn't there. The role of the regulator is to not only promote competition, but actually look after the needs and the demands of the consumer. We have lots of competition in the ICT space. What we're not getting is delivery of the quality of service that customers are paying for. The new licensing framework will give us the teeth that we need to hold them accountable to deliver that, regardless of whether they're serving you in Bordentown, a customer in East End or North Side, or a customer in the BRAC. The bottom line is we don't have that regulatory framework right now, and we will very shortly. The teeth are there in terms of the ability to fine, the administrative fines that the member from Northside pointed out earlier. The regulatory framework will be in place shortly. The consumer protection regs will be in place shortly. We will finally be in a position to deliver what is expected of Offreg ICT.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to turn to page 599 on the ownership agreement and look at the third point down that says adopt and enforce regulations that are in the public interest and ensure that service providers comply with established regulations. And then it also goes on to say, explore innovation that will encourage the efficient and cost-effective delivery of utility services. So when you do look at the mission, these are things that are listed here. I didn't write them, this is what is listed here. And what we're basically saying is now we need what it is that we need to do to start achieving this mission in which is stated here. Like I said, it's on page 599, they're listed there.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I actually have here a copy of the Utility Regulation and Competition Office Annual Plan 2019. I was going to ask for an update on it, but with respect to the new boss, I don't think I'll go to those lengths right now because clearly he has to get up to speed with the organization and what they've been accomplishing. But I do have questions on the regulatory side of things. The fact that my colleague from Barton Town West alluded to it, I can tell you right now what my average bundle of services is from my provider: telephone, TV, internet. I'm paying more than $400 a month. Rarely do I get the speeds I ask for. Rarely do I get to complete a phone call without it disconnecting. Rarely do I call the help desk line and get my problem resolved. Coming from an IT background, I am able to troubleshoot myself. By the time I get the help desk people in Jamaica on the phone, I've either fixed the problem myself or I can tell them what the problem is. We still haven't gotten anywhere close, and I've been coming here patiently because, and I can't blame you, sir, because you're just getting here, but patiently coming to Finance Committee, we make the same complaints every time. But we're not seeing the improvements. And yet, when I go to get a new handset for myself, sorry, Mr. Chairman, I know I'm giving a long preamble, but when I go to get a new handset for myself, my provider tells me the only way I can get that handset and not get it at a discount, but just pay for it monthly through my bill, I have to re-sign my contract for 2 years minimum. Mr. Chairman, all of these things lead right down to consumer protection, and we have not given that the priority that we need to give it. When are we going to see these things? I want a firm date because I don't want to come back here next Finance Committee, God willing, and we're sitting here going through the same things again. And the people in this country, the consumers, are the ones paying for it and suffering. So when can we get some firm commitments that we're going to sort this stuff out?
Mr. Chair, I am informed that the consumer protection regulations will be put into effect before the end of the year.
Mr. Chairman, can the gentleman tell us, I'm sorry, but this consumer protection is the one that the government is put in place, or is this a side issue that the OFREG is putting in place? OFREG specific? That's a question. Yeah.
Through the chair, it is OFREG specific, targeting more or less the ICT sector.
Okay. Well, I just need follow up on that one, please. Will that also include ICT providers? They things like their schedule on television. You know, you're paying $200 for a full packet, and 60% of it is repeats. The same station being repeated at a different number on there. Now that consumer protection has to include that. For instance, you got like 6 CNNs. You don't need one then. You got 4 or 5 ABCs. They can't repeat that. They can't have them in a different newscast. And then roaming charges. I was called the other day, 2,800 for 1 week. You couldn't rack that up if you even trying. Yet they have advertised $28 for 1 megabyte, I believe, or something like that. $27, $28. I would like to know how many megabytes I used up. That's the kind of protection I hope we're doing. Further, and for your information, I was minister at one time responsible. Further, I extended their time to do build out. This started in 2002. When I got in there in 2005, it had expired. Their build out had expired. I extended it, and by the time I left office, they still hadn't done it. No, they haven't done it yet either.
Member need a question, please.
I'm asking them when he gonna make them build it out.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I've documented the concerns from the honorable member regarding the quality of service and the multiple channels being broadcast. We will certainly have a look at it in our assessment for the new regulations.
Mr. Chairman.
Got to get some of these other.
No, but they ceded it to me, sorry. Just expanding on the roaming issue that the honorable leader of the opposition raised. Can we get a commitment, considering that the telecoms company pay a fixed monthly cost for roaming, literally fixed? There is no reason why our roaming charges should be what it is, considering that whether you use it or don't use it, they're literally paying the same cost to the U.S. providers, particularly in the U.S. It is actually a fixed cost per month. Yeah, so what they're charging us is, and that's why they cannot give you free incoming and all that kind of stuff, but it's a fixed cost. So at a minimum, the returns that they're making on that is way too much compared to what the market should be. And I think that's one of the things that they should quickly look into.
Member for Northside, and then member for Georgetown, then we're going to come back here to member for Savannah. So I'll get everybody.
To you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the new CEO if he would consider this scenario reasonable. This, I think it's a Samsung 10 Plus or something phone, works better in El Colony, Isle of Pines, than it works in Old Man Bay. In Old Man Bay, my house is less than 150 feet from the antenna. The cost for internet services in El Colony, Isle of Pines, was less than $20 CI. Pay for the card and you use it till it expire. The charges, roaming charges for cable and wireless was 800 CI. When are we going to offer some regulation to this industry?
Mr. Chair, we will commit to look at that situation under our consumer protection regulations.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what it means. 5G, 4G, 3G, right? Every time I turn on my television, everybody else in the world is talking about 5G. And do we have 3G in Cayman? And when are our regulators, who has to be, as the member from Bordentown West suggested, making more money on the investment per head of population in the Cayman Islands and anywhere else in the world, when is OFREG going to demand that we have 5G available in Cayman?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chair, we have begun those discussions, looking at the necessary policy and legislative framework we will need to enable 5G technology. One of our obligations under the law is to ensure that we create the necessary environment to minimize risks so that we could incentivize investment and promote innovation. That being said also, we would not also want to lose track in, first and foremost, getting our fundamentals right. So we have that obligation to be innovative, but at the same time, we have to get our basics right.
For Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the CEO. Nice to meet you, sir. We were here when we were talking about the license agreement for the cable providers and their local content obligations. Is OFREG of the view that these local providers are meeting that requirement now as it stands, or no?
Mr. Chair, I'll invite the Executive Director of ICT to respond. Sorry.
Again, I ask you, sir, just state your name and position.
Ali Famoy, Deputy CEO, Executive Director, ICT. In the case of broadcast television, there are no operators, commercial operators anymore, but their conditions were different than cable TV. The local content obligations were different. The license was different. The license conditions for the cable TV operators for local content is pretty much identical, and they are meeting it.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Through you, Mr. Chair. What are they using to meet those requirements?
Mr. Chair, as we heard this morning, the cable providers use a number of sources. They will use SIG TV. They will use a number of local production companies who produce content one might consider cultural, one might consider infomercial type content about Cayman, about places to visit, about places to stay. There are broadcast programs on cultural activities and things going on around Cayman. So there's a wide range of channels offering various types of content that are local and serve to meet the obligations that the cable TV providers have.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, can Mr. Ali say, do you monitor how much of the government-produced productions and video content do they use to meet this requirement? So, for example, just to give you an understanding what I'm trying to ask you, government produces a lot of content, naturally. This Legislative Assembly, this committee is part of that. SIG TV is a part of that. GIS is a part of that. That's a lot of content. Does that make 90% of their content and they just find 10%? Or how much do you monitor how much that is amongst the different providers?
So there are 4 cable TV providers licensed and 3 in operation. The 3 who are in operation tend to carry a wide variety of channels that serve to meet this need. And one of the channels that they set aside is SIG TV, which carries programs such as this and some Radio Cayman's talk shows, among other things. Each of the channels then provides a continuous stream of content. Some of it may be repeated because of the nature of things, but I wouldn't go as far as being able to put a percentage on how much of their content was government versus how much was from other sources. But Logic, for example, has probably at least 10 different channels carrying different types of content, and SIG TV is one of those channels.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Through you again, Mr. Chair. Don't you think it's important that we monitor how much is repeated? Because and here's why. If there was a 1-hour program repeated over and over and over and over and over and over again for a whole month straight, you wouldn't think that they're actually meeting their requirements. They're just using government channels to meet those requirements. So isn't it important that OFREG monitors the repetition and the amount of new content that's coming in, because the whole purpose of putting that requirement in place is for the continued production of local content. Would you agree?
Mr. Chairman, the member is actually quite right in that the original license condition for broadcast television, which again was different from cable, and more onerous and more demanding, was local broadcast TV license obligations. Those license obligations actually required a percentage of the local content to be generated locally, but also to be original. In other words, you couldn't repeat it over and over again. The objective there, I believe, was to make sure that there was new content, fresh content of a local origin available on broadcast over the air to the widest audience possible. And one of the ways of doing that was through a news broadcast, for example. But the content obligation didn't specify the type of programming. It didn't say it had to be a news broadcast or it had to be this. It just made reference to how much of it and what percentage of it had to be original, in other words. Unfortunately, those license obligations don't apply to the cable TV providers, typically because cable TV providers are carriers of content and not usually originators of content.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm glad you brought up the original arrangement of the licenses, because would it be fair to say that under those original requirements was when the then government decided to say, let's open up the market for more individuals to be in competition? But now we have changed that narrative, but now have more licensees. So it kind of flipped things on its head, because the original was that you meet these requirements, you gave the licenses, now you change the requirements without definition of what the requirements actually are. Which leads me to well, next question. Have we ever defined what those are yet?
To answer your first question, your
Yes.
last question first,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the state of affairs is somewhat confusing because of how everything was generated. Right now, we don't have any over-the-air broadcasters, commercial broadcasters, so it's a moot point as to what the obligation would be, used to be, should be. We have a cleaner situation with the cable TV providers in that their content obligations are very, very similar. But if we take a look at how all this began, it began before the ICTA was even formed. Back in the 90s, some of us old folks might remember there was CITV, Channel 33, CITN 27, Island 24. There was a Christian broadcasting station on Channel 21 and government on Channel 20. This was before the ICTA was even created. So the government of the day granted these 5 entities separate licenses, and I don't believe they had very specific content obligations until the ICTA was born. By then, several of those TV stations had failed or had been merged together. Mr. Seal's CITV Channel 33 was gone by the time ICTA was born in the early 2000s. At that point, the local content obligations were set for the remaining TV stations. But again, for whatever reason, they weren't the same. I'm not sure why. I can't find any record as to why one provider was given slightly different obligations than another. But these are the types of things that we're trying to clean up with our new licensing framework to provide a level playing field for everyone.
I got to give member from Savannah. You prepared to give way to the leader? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can we have copies of those licenses?
Oh, absolutely.
The July 2019?
The July 2019 license, you mean the ones that were just renewed?
Yes, July 2019.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. Explain to me, please, can we have them before this finishes? Because in April, I didn't receive the amended license until the Finance Committee was over.
I'll get them to you today, tomorrow, sir.
Okay. Can you explain
Would the member be okay if we sent them a web link to the website where they're located? Is that okay? They should be on the web.
I think if you send them by email, it might be better. We all have emails. That can be done tonight, really.
Yeah.
Can the member explain this? And Mr. Chairman, the authority shall have the right to impose upon the licensee additional obligation concerning the Type 6 ICT service, which may include obligations pertaining to such matters as programming and content. The licensee agrees that the authority shall have the right to impose obligations from time to time as are deemed advisable by the authority. The intent is for the licensee to have similar, but not necessarily identical, obligations as any other licensee offering a Type 6 ICT service. At a minimum, these obligations shall involve the following. A customer wishing to receive the licensee's public television service shall be provided with such service either via wireline or broadcast technology within a reasonable time frame and at no cost to the subscriber. This includes all manner of device required to provide service to the subscriber's premises. B, program content shall, at a minimum, be 50% local content, which shall include such items as local talk shows, educational, cultural, and religious programming, live sporting events, government information services, and live coverage of the proceedings of the legislature. C, public television service shall involve programming offered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. In light of what you were saying earlier, can you explain this, please?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the member is reading from a portion of the license for cable TV providers.
Yeah, because I think you said they weren't under certain obligations. Explain this one, please.
The cable TV providers have almost identical wording as you just read in each of their licenses. What varies, for whatever reason, I can't tell you why, but what varies is the percentage of the content that is expected to be local. Some is 50, some is 25, some is 30. I can't explain why. But the rest of the language is identical. What obtained under the broadcast TV license obligations was much more stringent, much more onerous. What percentage of it had to be repeated or could not be repeated, how many hours had to be done per day. It was much more stringent, a license obligation, very different from the one you just read. But at least the one you just read is almost identical across the remaining providers, the cable TV providers.
But that one was Digicel. This one is Hurley TV Limited. Public content means good quality, locally produced content that over any given week consists of a total of 60% local news and current affairs, news, sports, weather, and current affairs, 25% of local arts and culture, artists, example, music, dance, theater, and cultural, example, talk shows, and 15% local education, local educational program, example, college presentation. There is some much fundamental difference between those two.
So the one you just read was Hurley's TV.
Hurley's. You want to go through Ressa?
Hurley's TV is Cayman 27.
Absolutely.
So the broadcast TV license that you just read is very different from the cable TV license you read earlier. That was my point.
So are all Digicel providing theirs too?
Digicel is the one that, remember I said there were 4 licensed, but only 3 operating? Digicel has a license, but they're not operating a cable TV service right now.
So we have amended that so they don't have to. Is that it?
They don't have to, but they have a license to do so.
They don't have to?
No.
But if you have a license, aren't you obligated to do so in accordance with what you sent me? I mean, this is under your hand. It wasn't mine. And it says that Digicel, that about their obligations, that they have agreed to certain, to the authorities ruling over them. So they're not?
But they never launched their service. So the license obligation applies once they launch the service. And they have a license to do so, but they haven't done so as yet.
Well, would you explain that? Because as a regulator, government has given you a license to operate with certain conditions within this jurisdiction. And you're saying they don't have to launch it if they don't want to?
That wasn't part of the obligation to have a launch date. And I think it was 2012, 4 entities came in very quick succession to get cable TV licenses.
Yeah.
And those 4 entities were granted cable. Well, three joined the original Infinity Broadband, which had a license from the early 2000s. So Flow/Lime, and Logic and Digicel all applied for licenses within a 12-month period. And they were all granted, but only 2 of them started operating.
Mr. Chairman, this is the last thing I want to say.
I need to ask you to draw this line to a close because...
Yes. Cable and Wireless has similar stuff, obligations here. With the exception of, remember Digicel was 50%. This one says, program content shall, at a minimum, be 20% local content.
Yeah.
Is there some kind of affinity towards cable and wireless?
Mr. Chairman, it was before my time.
Okay. He had explained to us, remember, that was the one thing he could not explain was the different requirements in terms of the content, percentage of content.
But are they all doing it now? Those who have operated?
Yes, sir.
With what? With CIGTV?
With a wide variety of content providers that you will find on the cable TV systems in different channels.
But isn't it supposed to be original from them?
Not necessarily original. It's original. That wasn't a defined term, unfortunately, in the license.
Yeah, but it doesn't say it can be rebroadcast. It says theirs. Religious and all that kind of stuff. And what's the purpose of having such obligations on licensees when they don't have to fulfill it? It just does not make sense for the people of this country to be watching something that has no value to them. Or we are expecting that because one has cable and wireless, it won't be known what is going on Digicel or others for that matter. It just doesn't make sense that Mr. Chairman, I gotta yield my time.
I was suggesting we're not going to solve those issues here today.
But Mr. Chairman, we have the ICTA here, Don Frey, who is saying that they're going to protect consumers, but protection of consumers also include what they're watching and providing it. And it does not say that it has to be done by virtue of subscription to get this local stuff. OFREC has put on them an obligation to provide the mechanisms to put that into their homes. And if you do not subscribe to them, it does not come into your homes. That is where I diverge from everybody else. And we need to stop. Somehow, maybe OFREG needs to educate all others, all and sundry, that tends to see that you can't do it over a year. There are transitional boxes that can deal with that. So let's not, I don't want to hear that. We heard it earlier in here today that there's no such thing because of digital. We're going digital now and smart televisions. Well, there are provisions, there are mechanisms that can change that. That's what needs to happen with local television soon through OFREG.
Member for
Mr. Chair,
Savannah.
I didn't get to ask my last question.
Member for Savannah. He's been waiting patiently. Everybody else has had a chance. And I'm going to take the vote on this too.
Mr. Chairman, this is really a comment and a brief question. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Cummins, the new CEO. But I must say, I feel sorry for him. What we've experienced from OFREGs since its inception, I remember last Finance Committee when there was a supplementary of $3 million on top of operating expenses. Listening this morning to the television, I see that regular gas in the States is less now than CI $2. A lot of it here now is almost $4.70. I see refuel has it for $4.03. I now go there and save almost $8 on a fill up. But what I would like to say is what I've said before. We are losing the amount of money there. It is simpler for us to take the licks from these people who are pinching the few pennies away from us than for us to continue, as with some other government companies having to losing so much money and government has to subsidize. And I would leave that last one with the Honorable Premier to consider. Give Mr. Cummins a year or so to try to get this thing sorted out. If not, let's pull the plug on this. But if you could tell me about, just briefly, what we're going to do about this gap from the purchase price of gasoline to when it gets here, what's being sold at the pumps. I mean, no matter what excuse they tell me, I take it with a grain of salt, because I always remember Mr. former Deputy Governor, Mr. Don Ebanks, who used to get the information and share with us.
Mr. Chair, as I explained earlier, the regime that is implemented here related to for the regulation of fuels, it's quite unique, to be honest. But as I said, I want to respect the process in that let's have the market assessment complete, and then we will take the necessary initiatives at that point.
Mr. Chair,
Georgetown Central, final question.
Thank you very much. And this is for Mr. Ali, if he would like to come back to the mic. He just highlighted the fact that this happened in, I can't remember which administration he said that the licenses were granted. If he can respond to that in my question, that would be great, which administration it was. But if they all had different requirements, but all paying the same license fee, isn't that indirectly creating an unfair requirement for them to fulfill? Because we know that these requirements cost money. Hence the reason it was difficult to enforce in the first place. And how is that possible to actually offer licenses that meet different requirements? Isn't that unethical?
Mr. Chairman,
State name again, please, sir.
Alifa Amoy, Executive Director, ICT, OFREG. I can't speak to why. It baffles me as well. There was such a difference. in an identical license, a difference in some of those conditions. All we can do is try to right the wrongs, sir, with our new licensing framework to provide that level playing field. I think, as the CEO alluded to, part of our remit is to make sure that things are fair and that there is predictability in the regulated industry so that investors have confidence to put millions of dollars into these businesses and create jobs and create a rate of return. We have to make sure that things are fair, and that's part of what we're trying to do.
What was that a key element as to why you couldn't enforce it all of this time because of the different requirements?
It was part of it. It would have opened us up to potential litigation.
All in favor of URC 1, drafting legislation and policy advice, $74,289 in 2020, $74,289 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no.
No.
Ayes have it. URC 2, management of KY Internet domain, $25,000 in 2020 and 2021. Any questions? Member for North Side.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the ICTA people. Some time ago, I made a suggestion to the Deputy Governor that the government make some effort to secure some KY domains, particularly those for the electoral districts, for like Northside Electoral District, Bordentown Electoral District, and make them the property of government. Has any such application been made to the ICTA?
Mr. Chair, Ali Famoy, Executive Director, ICT, OFREG. I'm not aware of such an application, but there could be a case to be made to reserve such names, set them aside to ensure that they're being used by legitimate representatives.
My suggestion was not that it be available to me as a representative, but the electoral district have it, so that whoever the representative was, all of their emails and websites and everything would be under that domain, and there would be some continuity for the constituents that they represent.
It's a very good idea, Mr. Chairman. We would welcome supporting that.
Mr. Chairman.
Member for East End.
I just want to ask, are we seeing, for the lack of a better word, the hoarding up of the domain, the KY domain in the country? Meaning, they licensing it and not using it for park, if you may.
Mr. Chairman, when I joined the ICTA some 5 years ago, we did have that problem. And it was in part because there was no fee for ICT, for KY domain registrations. What we did was two things. We charged a fee for it, and we opened it up to the world. The fee that we charge is significant. It's almost $40 per name per year, which is sometimes 10 times that of a .tv or a .ly. So we have the original 10,000 names that we had shrunk because we got rid of a lot of the people who were indeed doing exactly as you describe, sitting on a domain name, hoarding it. And now we have people who legitimately want a .ky domain and are using it. But we have reserved thousands of domains that we think are of value and that we think we can sell to responsible entities going forward. But we do a little bit of due diligence in this regard, and if we find that someone is misusing the domain space, we will take the name from them.
Do you have the right to, or have you ever exercised the revocation of any of those domains?
Yes.
That's because of abuse?
Because we have an investigation going on right now for someone who was pretending to be a news magazine in Eastern Europe through a similar domain name in the KY domain space. And it looks like it's going to end up us revoking that domain name as well. So yes, we have done it for misuse, for squatting, for potentially for copyright abuse, that sort of thing. We want to protect the reputation of the KY domain and the jurisdiction.
Okay.
All in favor of
Mr.
URC?
Chair, sorry, I thought you were.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you say if off-reg is, heard you said you were securing some important domains. Are the government positions and the like being protected? Like, say, for instance, the Office of Opposition Leader, Office of the Premier, which are already in use, but things that may not be in use now that you suspect that are for government official purposes, are those the types of things that you would secure? And where would you find that list of secured ones?
It's not a publicly available list, but what we did, Mr. Chairman, when we decided to open the KY domain to more than just entities who lived and worked here, but to the world, was we identified, with the help of folks who were very familiar with the domain space, the global domain space, we identified thousands of domain names which might have been valuable once they were opened up, and we set them aside. It could have been names of familiar brands, it could have been typical government type of registries or names. It could have been anything, a string of numbers, for example, that other jurisdictions have found valuable. Those names were all set aside, and we began looking at whether we could auction them for a premium.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Sorry.
Bordentown West.
Thank you very much. Through you, sir, to the witness. I remember quite a while back there was a scenario where I think one of the former managing director of the ICT or whatever had went out and bought up an old pile of Cayman domains. Whatever became of that issue? Was that ever resolved, or did we ever take ownership of those domain names? That those were actually quite valuable domain names at the time. Whatever became of that?
I'm not aware of the specifics, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, sorry. Arden, sorry.
I think you two need to have that conversation then.
No.
Okay.
That's a fact. We paid that off. That was part of the negotiation, get rid of Archibald.
Mr. Chair, I think for the Hansard's purposes, that if we're going to say things are, some things are paid and some things are not, we're not outlining exactly what we're talking.
I think the question was asked of the member of the other witness, and he said he had no idea about it. Didn't know,
right,
couldn't elucidate.
Yes, you're
so
right,
I think
Mr.
that's
Chair.
where that's where the conversation needs to end.
Fair enough,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, you're right.
Was this gentleman, through you, Mr. Chairman, here under the former minister for this portfolio?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
All in favor of URC2 management of KY Internet Domain, $25,000 in 2020 and $25,000 in 2021. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye.
Aye.
Those that say no, the ayes have it. URC3 collection and verification of license fees, $100,383 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions?
Just one question, Mrs. Speaker.
Member for
has
East
all
End.
ICT licensees paid up?
Mr. Chair, the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
Is it? Can you explain why 27 are back on the air then if they're paid up?
They're no longer a licensee.
Mr. Chairman, can the witness say whether or not all licensees have paid up all of their fees?
Did it pay back fees?
Mr. Chair,
Member.
except for Cayman 27, which is outstanding.
Oh, and they haven't been revoked.
They have been suspended, sir.
And others were. Can we find out how many licensees' license were suspended because of non-payment of fees, regulatory and otherwise, and license fees? And what happened as a result of, if they paid up, were they reinstated? How many were revoked, suspended?
Mr. Chairman, Ali Famoy, Executive Director, ICT. Cayman 27 stopped paying in 2017. And for 2 years, we tried to work out a way to keep the station on the air because it was the only over-the-air TV station left. Cayman is a small place. Very soon, other licensees figured that if he's not going to pay, I'm not going to pay either. By the time we took regulatory action in 2019, we went from 1 delinquent licensee to 10, 9 of whom paid up when we took enforcement action. The only one who didn't, and whose license we suspended, was Cayman 27.
So how long does it take how long does it take for a license to get suspended for the lack of fees payment?
Every situation can be weighed on its own merits. We had a licensee who had a cash flow issue, and we gave them some payment terms. Very small operator, not making a lot of money. Others.
How you know they wasn't making money? They were doing their returns to you?
Yes, we see the returns.
And you hear about the returns?
For those who a royalty fee is applicable, yes. Audited financial statements.
What about regulatory fees?
Regulatory fees are a basket.
You call them royalties?
No, they're separate. Okay. They're separate. Royalties are paid through us to government. Regulatory fees are what we collect to fund our operations. Yes.
And what does it take to have those up to date? Have everybody paid them up to date? How long will it take for you to suspend someone?
Generally speaking, we collect the data and the fees on a quarterly basis. Mm-hmm. So if more than 1 or 2 quarters go by and we're not seeing, we don't just let it sit. We obviously are in correspondence with licensees to try to figure out what the issues are, what their problems are. They may have changed hands, they may have changed a financial controller, they may have misunderstood something. So we try to work things out with folks before we take a harder stance with regards to enforcement. It's a standard enforcement pyramid that we go up, where the first step is consultation and discussion before we move to the next step. So it may be a quarter or 2 before we take any harsh action.
Okay, and so the others did 2 years before an action was taken because they were saying tit for tat. They were saying if you don't enforce them, you're not going to enforce me. And you were in catch-22. You couldn't do anything. Were there any mitigating circumstances when it came to 27 that, or how far had they been stretched, those mitigating circumstances?
Mr. Chairman, the country has seen the rise and fall of commercial broadcast television. It has been tried and failed over and over again. To the extent that the market may not be able to support commercial over-the-air broadcasting, you might consider that a mitigating circumstance? To the extent that we had a player who was savvy and understood the risks and understood the books before they bought the business, maybe they should have known better. The debate that really needs to happen in the public fora is how do we go about producing and delivering public service broadcasting to the country.
But isn't there a real issue in that it is needed? There is no maybe or perhaps. A classic example is right now there's a campaign going on, and eventually we have a political campaign and what have you. This is something that is fundamental to the development of any country in today's age. Is it not incumbent upon us, whether it's you or us here in Parliament or the Cabinet, isn't it incumbent upon us to stretch our imagination on how to do this? Whether to put one in place, that is, keep it in place, whatever the case may be. Whether we sit down and negotiate with everybody, and we only do it on one, and we pay through the universal fund to keep that going. Not necessarily, if they have a broadband as well as the local content, whoever's doing it, we subsidize the local part of it through the universal fund or through subscription or whatever the case may be. This is a necessary thing. Going over by CIGTV is not the answer. Even the Premier has agreed with that. That is not the answer, and that may be a short-term fix, which is not a fix. Really, when you look at it, not everybody can look on the internet. The little old lady in East End or little old man in East End wants to sit down in front of the TV and see one of his legislators getting up in here talking or something. This is such a fundamental issue in this country that we need to sit down and deal with it. I'm wondering if OFREG has made any initiative to recommend ways that we can get this thing back. And it don't necessarily have to be 27. They have the equipment down. Somebody could buy that out and put it back on the air, something like that.
There are any number of options, Mr. Chairman, to explore that we looked at a half dozen when we were trying to figure out a way forward with Cayman 27. But this actually began when we did a consultation in 2014 on the future of local TV broadcasting. It was probably the most active consultation we've ever had. We had every licensee and 300 other citizens writing in to comment on local TV broadcasting. This is an issue that is near and dear to a lot of people's heart, and we would welcome an involvement or a discussion, but it's not something the regulator should create. It is something the country should think about, and we will do our part, but it really needs to be in response to what the country wants to do.
Do you know if your board has, and I don't see them here, I don't know who's here from the board, do you know if your board has sought directives from the government?
We had lengthy discussions when Cayman 27 issue came up with caucus and with cabinet. I can honestly say that this government has not ignored this issue. This has been a very painful period for everyone.
I really don't know why we continue to bring caucus into any decision making that government has to make. Caucus is but a complement of the politician. It's cabinet that makes the decision whether they consult with for the support of their caucus or what, but everybody talks about you make presentation to caucus, you made it to government, as if caucus is the one with the ultimate authority. I would like to hope that you run yours like that so you can have a big stick over them. And you too, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to find out if maybe it's better we address that with the board, to see if they have sought direction from the government on this matter. On how we go about, Mr. Chairman, the Premier said, on how we go about trying to find some innovative way to reintroduce and get television, whether we're going to subsidize it through subscriptions or whatever the case may be, or through Universal Fund, the Universal Fund, which all of the others pay into. I think that's the easiest way to do it, through the Universal Fund, you know. So I don't know, maybe the others can put a charge. Maybe government could decide to put a $2 charge on every subscription from the others to pay for it. Whether it's 27 do it again or someone else do it again, it doesn't matter. But it is a void. It has created a void in this country. And I'm not trying to be facetious or be political here. We need to get this back up somehow.
Member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. I noticed that the timeliness of the verification on the receipt of money is within 1 month. Is that because all of the license fees are based on some kind of income calculations?
Mr. Chairman, through you, we expect to see the payments come in within 1 month of the end of the quarter. So in other words, they've got a month to get their books and their check to us.
This talks about your verification of whether their amount is correct or not, and not say the implication here is that verification takes a month, not this.
Mr. Chairman, the licensees are expected to get their information to us by the 15th of the month after the end of the quarter, and then we will take 30 days to verify that information after it's submitted.
And again, it's subject to an annual review on audited financial statements, and that's done within the month of the end of the year.
Mr. Chairman, you will know that an audited financial statement takes a little more than a month to put together and review. So we're more reasonable with the annual audited financial statements.
Georgetown Central, or member from Northside, you have more? Okay, member for Georgetown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can Mr. Ali say, how will this problem with the lack of the TV option, or neutral TV option, should I say, affect the equal opportunity TV option concept when it comes time to election?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that question. I believe the member is getting at media plurality, the concept of media plurality. It's a wider question than our law tends to address.
Sorry, I apologize. Through you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ali, can you repeat that again for me, please?
The concept I believe you're getting at is media plurality and the independence of media. It's not something our law really addresses. I think there was an assumption that there would be a vibrant private sector industry that would provide options when it comes to media, whether that's print or TV or radio or otherwise. In the radio space, we have 15 broadcasters on air as of last night. Mm-hmm. We don't have that kind of plurality and that kind of competitiveness in the broadcast TV space, as every member well knows. So each market is very different.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. We just heard off-air comment that everybody will be in the same situation. When you say everybody, meaning government and opposition, are all elected persons or anybody who chooses to run. But we also spoke earlier about the fact that the government has a machinery that promotes the government agenda. Don't you, based on a regulator of the TV market, do you find any issues with that problem and whether it creates unfair competition as to the per the elections law?
Mr. Chairman, I can't speak to the elections law, but we have our remit is to promote competition on the ICT side and innovation and to look after the consumer. Anytime, and I think any member of the government bench would agree, anytime you have a single provider in the space, whether it's media or telecoms or otherwise, that can give rise to problems, whether it's consumer protection issues or lack of competition or advertising rates, for example, if you're the only media provider in that space. So I think everybody would like to see a multitude of providers in every single one of our spaces.
Last question. Through you, Mr. Chair, do you predict before the next election that we'll have another independent television company up and running?
I wouldn't predict that, no.
Thank you.
Member for Bodden Town West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, sir. I notice on page 600 of the ownership agreement that there's a note there that says to establish a 90-day operating expense reserve for the organization by 31st of December 2020. Can, through you to the witness, can at least give us an update on where we are with regards to establishing that reserve and exactly how many days we're at and when do they, well, basically expect to, what challenges they foresee in terms of not being able, if any, to meet that target date?
Mr. Chair, Malky Cummings, CEO. In relation to the member's question, we are currently drafting a policy that will govern the establishment and use of that general reserve.
Thank you, thank you very much for the answer. And through you, Mr. Chairman, I remember looking at some place, looking at the breakdown of revenues, and I was trying to see what the OFREG was making from the water section, from the water sector. Is it possible for the witness to give us an idea in terms of where the funds or the funds collected for the water sector is actually budgeted within the ownership agreements or the financial statements? Because I actually couldn't find it.
Mr. Chair. In response to the member's question.
Members, please allow the member to go for the witness to respond.
Yes, Mr. Chair, on page 633, note 7, it gives some specifics regarding the total revenues. 633. Yes, Mr. Chair.
sorry, 633 looks like it's Port Authority. Am I looking at the wrong one?
Mr. Chair, if you look at Note 7 on the financial
Or the purchase
statement.
agreement?
Note 7 on the financials. Ownership agreement.
Number 633 is Port Authority. Page 633. Well, Port Authority starts from page 629, so 633 is Port Authority.
It appears, Mr. Chair, we have some differences in the page numbering, but no. But if you look at Note 7 on the ownership agreements,
Remember, if you look at 625 and witness, see if that's the of the ownership agreement, if that's the information you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm looking at and well, that's the reason for my the question in terms of, I mean, I see regulatory fees, I see radio license, I see license fees, but I was trying to get a breakdown in terms of where the fees from the water go. Because I look back at the law, and I think that was one of the sectors that are also regulated by OFREG. So I was just trying to understand where that was carried.
Mr. Chair, to the member's question, it is not broken down by sector.
Yeah, but okay. But you guys are collecting, because I think that was previously collected by Water Authority before you guys now collecting those funds.
Mr. Chair, we haven't begun that process as yet.
So I just want to understand then. So is OFREG carrying the costs for the water sector, but not carrying the revenues for the water sector?
Now, the revenues are projected. And OFREG hasn't collected any revenues as yet.
But the cost is budgeted here, but you don't have the revenues. I just need to understand if that's the case.
Yes, sir. OFREG is still in discussions with the Water Authority regarding these, the arrangement.
So is it a situation then that we transfer those costs to the Water Authority?
Mr. Chair, the regulatory functions have been transferred from the Water Authority to OFREG. OFREG and the Water Authority, they are still in discussions regarding the transfer of those fees and the conditions.
Mr. Chairman, this question more directly to yourself and the Financial Secretary. I'm trying to understand, because there seems to be a mismatch here between the revenues to pay for the costs and where the cost is being carried. I mean, in this situation, if the cost is in OFREG for regulating the water sector, the fees associated with it should also be in the OFREG. So it can't be a situation then where we are in essence voting funds to subsidize probably OFREG to the tune when in fact they should have been collecting this money from a different entity.
I mean, remember your position, I think, is reasonable. We just don't have the basis here, right here in front of us to determine whether.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
the position that put forward may be reasonable to an officious bystander, but they, as the member said, they are ongoing discussions with Water Authority, and not all of the story has been told. Perhaps when Water Authority come, you could also act at that stage, because Water Authority has at least one occasion written a check, which they did not accept or cash.
I definitely would like to hear what Water Authority has to say when they come now. But as a matter of just proper financial reporting, I mean, revenues and expenses are matched within the different entities, and we are here voting funds, in a sense, for Cabinet to purchase the services from Ofreg, when in fact we should maybe have been voting for less funds if they were collecting what they should have been collecting. But like I said, it is still at the end of the day spaghetti around the plate, one government entity to the next. So we will see exactly when Water Authority comes. Thanks.
All in favor of URC3, collection and verification of license fees, $100,383 in 2020, $100,383 in 2021. Standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. URC5, education to local businesses and the general public on sectoral issues, $8,215 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the CEO. I wonder if he could give us an idea of what these educational exercises entail, because I know I get one on my bill from the Water Authority, but I haven't seen anything about your expectations for TV or IC or telephone or electricity or anything else. So what are these educational stuff to the general public?
Mr. Chair, these are related to the ICT sector, and I would like to invite the Executive Director of ICT to address it.
Mr. Chairman, not to bail Mr. Savoy, but according to the description here, this can't be an ICTA matter. The ICTA might have some stuff that they do, but let's talk about the effects of competition and choices available, individual rights when dealing with telecommunication companies, complaint procedures, what information is available from price regulation, etc., etc. That certainly has to be something to do with the operation of Ofreg itself and the board.
Mr. Chair, Ali Famoy, Executive Director, ICT. Historically, this was an output that was covered under our originally ICTA and was specific to ICT, but for this budget, it was expanded to cover just general public relations and education for all sectors across Ofreg.
In other words, in a nutshell, this is the PR program for Ofreg.
Basically, yes.
Mr. Chairman, through you.
Member for West Bay North.
Where are we in the, what's the position of the Ofreg website? Because right now it offers very little to the public or to anyone.
Mr. Chairman, there's a program underway to improve the website and its functionality to make it more user-friendly. We're not happy with it either, to be honest.
Mr. Chairman, through you, is there a timeline?
First quarter next year.
Member for Newlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I noticed that we're on some of the recent press releases coming out of Ofreg. I've noticed that they've been branded and sent out by a local marketing company, Fountainhead. Is this some of these funds here being used for that initiative or to pay them?
Some of the work that they do is related to public education, but no, not directly from that fund.
So where are they paid through? Under what heading?
Wouldn't be a specific heading under outputs that we have to cabinet. So only some of the work that that we would do through Fountainhead for public education would fall under that particular output that we have to cabinet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. What is the remit of Fountainhead? Because I just found it odd that we're using a marketing firm. Does Ofreg have its own marketing and PR team, or is it that you just don't have the resources?
That role was just recently, and I mean 2 weeks ago, a month ago, hired in a marketing and corporate and a complaints type role. Until then, we didn't have any dedicated role within Ofreg, and we typically outsourced it as needed.
All in favor of URC 5, Education to Local Businesses and the General Public on Sectoral Issues, $8,215 in 2020 and $8,215 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. Turning now to page 10 and URC 6, Regional and International Representation, $50,000 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Northside.
Mr. Chairman, there's a list here of about 12 to 15 organizations, but I only see that we're attending 6 meetings. Is it that the rest of the organizations are not worth attending, or what is the Ofreg position on that? No, there's an increase in the vote. I know that, you know that, but no, because I know they got anyway.
Mr. Chair, some of these organizations or the conferences do not necessarily require physical attendance. So Ofreg, in some instances, participate via the internet.
All in favor of URC 6, Regional and International Representation, $50,000 in 2020 and $50,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. Ayes have it. URC 7, National Cyber Security Initiatives, $100,000 in 2020 and 2021. Are there any questions? Member for Newlands.
I ain't got much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wonder if you could get a better understanding of what the national cyber security objectives are.
Mr. Chair, I'll invite Executive Director ICT to address.
Mr. Chair, Ali Famoy, Executive Director, ICT. The law actually calls for the office to be responsible for national cybersecurity, and we're addressing that in multiple ways. One is to make sure that critical national infrastructure is protected, whether that's power infrastructure or telecom infrastructure. Two is to work with other agencies such as the police in making sure that if there are cyber crimes initiated within the jurisdiction or against the jurisdiction, that we can work together to investigate, resolve, and deter those types of crimes. And then Thirdly is to set up a national cybersecurity incident response team. So that's sort of like a hazard management response team, but for cyber-related incidents.
Thank you. I'm assuming that most of the threats would come from outside of the Cayman Islands, but have there been any local interdictions or prosecutions for cybercrime?
No. Mr. Chairman, unfortunately, we don't have a cyber crime law per se. We are working with a number of government agencies to do an analysis of current legislation that we have, some of which is kind of old, to determine whether or not we need to update those individual pieces of legislation, such as the ICT law, the computer misuse law, and so forth, or if we should go ahead and try to suggest a comprehensive new cyber law.
Thank you. I don't want to leave the public with the impression that we're completely unprotected from a legislative point of view. Could you tell us what protections there are in the law that we can rely on now?
Mr. Chairman, the police for a number of years have been relying on a provision of the ICT law, which is quite broad, which enables them to prosecute, and they have brought a number of cases to court, where citizens or individuals are using ICT service or ICT network to threaten, annoy, or harass other individuals. So it allows them a broad umbrella, if you will, under which they can pursue any number of activities. But again, in discussions that we've had with Council of Europe and 20 odd other nations around the Caribbean, it's quite clear that the world is grappling with this problem of cybercrime, and that we need to strengthen our defenses, if you will, going forward.
Thank you. How many dedicated resources do you have working on this in this area?
Right now, I'm afraid we don't have any dedicated resources. What we're intending to use the funding, the additional funding for, is to ramp up those 3 initiatives that we spoke about, and to work more closely with a new member of staff in core government, who is the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, for core government, which has been a much needed role within. As you know, government is the largest IT network in the country, with a lot of critical information in it for all citizens. So working hand in hand with this lady and her team, we're hoping to address that cybersecurity issue and the wider national cybersecurity issue.
And from the perspective of the wider issues, I mean, just taking government, for example, if you have your government's core infrastructure, there are going to be people who interact with that through their systems. How far does your reach go in terms of ensuring that private sector businesses and so on are falling in line and putting in the right, I would say, anti-cyber threat initiatives, you know, the latest antivirus or whatever it may be, to ensure that government's assets are protected while we interact with third parties?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. The powers that OFREG has are focused mostly on its licensees. So making sure that the telecom network infrastructure, the power infrastructure, and so forth is protected. That's where the majority of our powers lie today. What we're looking at is, do we need to create another piece of legislation or update existing legislation so that we can do what the member is asking, which is ensure that the private sector, regardless of the industry they're in, is deploying the very best in terms of cybersecurity.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly where I was going, because I mean, I have observed that there is a sort of a void there that nobody's really looking after, that concerns me. But clearly, you're not going to do it with $100,000 a year, so might be something for the minister to consider going forward.
Member for Georgetown Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to bring up a concern I had that I brought up the last Budget Finance Committee, and I was a bit teased about it the last time, but I think it's important that I bring it up. Currently, right now, if anybody goes on any internet browser, particularly children, is what I'm concerned about. Let me just clarify this. An adult can do whatever they want. That's their own personal life. But right now, any child that has access to a mobile device, and we know that there's a large number of young people below the age of 18 who have access to mobile devices and internet, that the accessibility to pornography is so free, so quick, and so easy. And you compare that to the United Kingdom, whereby if one was trying to access pornography in the United Kingdom, you have to prove that you're of the age of 18. We don't have that here. And I'm concerned about the fact that we don't have that, because without the proper maturity of a child or an adult, it can have adverse effects. That's why we have protections across the world. And I think we're behind time in respect to that. Is there any plan by OFREG to implement restrictions in respect to accessibility via the web to pornography in the interest of protecting young people?
There's very little that a single regulator can do. We're such a small fish in a very large pond when it comes to the internet. Regulators around the world are struggling with the types of issues that the member is raising, whether it's pornography or cyberbullying or illegal gambling or what have you. There's very little a single regulator can do. What we can do in our given jurisdictions is educate the public to the greatest extent that we can about how to be safe online, how to protect your kids, how to protect your confidential information, and that sort of thing. Other than that, other than creating a massive national firewall, there's not a lot, unfortunately, that can be done.
Is the protection of our children not worthy of a national firewall? The UK does it.
The UK has certain laws in place for service providers that operate within the European Union and within the UK. So their ambit is quite large in terms of covering the entire European Union. But someone who can provide a website located outside of their jurisdiction and provide access to any user, whether they're in the UK or otherwise. The concept of a national firewall exists in China, but not very many other places in the world.
Through you, Mr. Chair, are you suggesting that in the UK you can get on their internet platforms and access pornography with escaping the requirement to prove that you're 18?
I'm not aware of a proactive blocking mechanism in any Western country. The reason I can say that is because I just came from a conference of regulators where things like this were being discussed, where freedom of expression and other issues are at the root of their constitutional and legal frameworks, and so they're struggling with how to do exactly what the member's asking for.
Okay, just last question. If we were to decide as a country that we want to enact something like this, what would be the cost in your mind? Ballpark, I can't expect you to give me exact cost, but to put something like that in place, because I think it's important, in my opinion.
If we're talking about regulation or legal requirements for folks who have websites to require verification of age, that wouldn't be all that costly. It's just a rule. If we're talking about building some kind of infrastructure, that could be quite expensive.
Chairman.
Member for Bud. No, I think I have to go back to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. No, same subject. Mr. Chairman, isn't it reasonable? Internet is not, I can't get internet on this unless I go through a provider. And likewise in my house. Isn't it reasonable to expect that we, as the regulator, as the country, can require them to provide a parental blocking mechanism?
Right now, that would be against our regulations. That would mean that they have to inspect every single website and transaction that you conduct through your device. in order for them to determine whether or not it violates a particular rule that would be against our regulations.
Okay. I am saying, is it reasonable, whether we could do legislation or not, to obligate them to provide a parental control mechanism, i.e. a program that identifies certain words and what have you that they could apply, that we could get them to put on their server that parents could utilize for their service to, and it maybe we have to do something to do it. I'm not saying under the current regime, but it is possible that we could do that.
It is possible. No Western democracy has instituted such a thing.
Mr. Chairman, in this day and age of smartphones, as parents, you can go into the settings of these phones and block the phones. And I'm going to tell parents right now, look at what your kids are doing, block their phones, block them from going on those websites, because at some point we also have to take responsibility for what our kids are looking at too. It can't be a situation where we're looking to regulate every single thing. Look at what your kids are doing. I can tell you, I block them for my kids, and I will tell people, I'd be more than happy to tell you how to block it for yours. iPhone, Samsung, they all have those settings there where you can literally restrict those sites. Those phones have built-in things to detect those things. So I think that's the first line of defense that we should be looking at.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, in all due respect, I agree with my colleague, but even the most responsible parent tries their hardest to monitor these things, and it's a responsibility of us legislators to assist them in any way we can. And if that means, by all means, the children in the United Kingdom and Europe all have responsible parents over there too, and they still have a program in place. We have to recognize that children are a lot smarter with technology these days, as well as more efficient with accessibility to override the features and settings of phones. I see children at age 6 years old being able to operate a phone better than I can. So that's not the point. The point is that I know that there's our responsible parents who are taking the necessary actions, but we as a government have to assist them in this effort to mold constructive, good assets to bring into our community by molding them to be good adults. And sometimes blocking harmful things to their development is a key part of a government's responsibility. So I'm not suggesting that we regulate the industry too much, but we have to remember it has a social impact effect, and it's our job to look into the factors of that. I'll finish with this. If there is anything that Mr. Ali can suggest, particularly to me as a member for Georgetown Central, on ideas to look into for research, and in respect to how to implement that in Cayman, I would like to hear about them, because if the day comes that I'm a part of a government, I think that's something that I would like to put in place for my country.
Mr. Chairman, this is what my friend, my good friend from colleague from Savannah speaks about. In these countries, when they start these sex ed class from an early age, exposing kids to all manner of things, this is the kind of steps that they have to go down further down the line to then protect the kids from the same things that they teach them in the classroom. This is why it's important for us to get the right school curriculum now, and at the end of the day, step up and do what it is that needs to be done. Mr. Eden, thanks for always championing that issue.
Thank you all. All in favor of URC 7, National Cybersecurity Initiatives for $100,000 in 2020, $100,000 in 2021, standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. Ayes have it. URC 10, monitoring and controlling the storage, handling, quality, and measurement of fuel products, $812,000 in 2020 and 2021. Questions? Member for Northside.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, in the monitoring and controlling the storage, does OFREG have a way of detecting leaks at some of these gas stations, some of which I believe have tanks that are fairly ancient, and what protection is offered not only for the pollution of groundwater, but the explosive potential?
Mr. Chair, Malky Cummings, CEO of REG. I do not have that answer at the moment in the absence of the CFI.
Can I ask, where is the, what do you call him, CFI? Where is he?
That's the Chief Fuel Officer, Chief Fuel Inspector, sir. He has not been able to attend this meeting because of personal reasons. I would not want to go further and elaborate on the circumstances.
And he is the sole person that operates in that realm of fuel monitoring, etc.?
I was only informed, Mr. Chair, about his unavailability this morning.
That's not the question. I understand that things happen, but what I'm saying is he the only person that has any information or any involvement in that sector of off-reg?
Mr. Chair, no. But we could certainly provide a response to your question.
Is it? Well, Mr. Chairman, I have a number of questions on storage as well, because we all know about what transpired recently with the Jackson Point, with one of the storage facilities. And it's in the interest of this committee to be able to get answers, and maybe we need to find someone else, whomever else is working alongside him, to come here and answer these questions, because the vulnerability of our people is serious.
While they are conferring, members, can I just ask for an indication from you? We have URC 10, which we are looking at now, and then URC 11 to come after. In the remaining appropriations on this page, do you have questions with regard to the rest of them, or can we take them as one vote?
We already agreed that OE 5 straight down to IE 36 could be block voted after we have completed URC 11.
Can I ask for your indulgence then that we go ahead and take the vote on those items while they're conferring, and we come back to these two items?
Agreed.
Okay. All those in favor of OE5, constituency allowance, $1,086,000 in 2020 and $1,086,000 in 2021. OE111, disability policy, $125,000 in 2020 and $125,000 in 2021. OE112, older persons policy, $125,000 in 2020 and $125,000 in 2021. OE113, administrative and advisory support to members of the Legislative Assembly, $1,719,782 in 2020 and $1,612,174 in 2021. EI36, Cabinet Office, $196,800 in 2020 and $90,000 in 2021. All standing part of the schedule to the bill, please say aye. Those against, no. The ayes have it. We come back now to URC 10 and for him. And for the I'm not sure how we're going to proceed with this, members, because the gentleman is truly unable to be here. And from what I'm hearing, there is no one else that is available or that can answer the types of questions that are being asked, the gentleman in charge of the fuels.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Monroe has been at the hospital all day. He's not able to come. So if members really want to interrogate this issue, may I ask that I be allowed to move that be deferred until later in the Finance Committee? So I so move, Mr. Chairman.
I'm happy to accept that, and we move on with these other appropriations, and we can come back to.
I don't worry about it.
Okay. May I then put the motion then to the floor that we defer these two items until we can bring the proper witness to this chamber to be interrogated, to be questioned? All in favor, please say aye. Those against, no? Okay. Not wrong choice of words, but you know what I meant. We're going to turn our attention now to appropriations to the Premier on behalf of the Office of the Police Commissioner.
Mr. Chairman, you may want to take a break because I don't see the police commissioner anywhere around here.
Are you dealing? Let's take a 10-minute break then, please.